Cheers, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am Dave Brown, and this is the New Populist. Last Thursday, we had Rand Paul, one of the few good senators in the U.S. Senate. He introduced a bill to formally end the war on terrorism that began in 2001 after the attacks on September 11th. Now, you would think after 22 years, we would have won. But apparently, our Senate feels differently. Apparently, we haven't won, and we need to continue to fight. And 86 senators, actually, let me double check that. Yes, 86 senators voted to continue the war on terrorism. Only 9 said no. Only 9 said enough is enough. And as an American, it is frustrating. I am a non-interventionist. I do not believe that our interventions in the Middle East have done anyone any good. And it's so frustrating that apparently after all this time, no one else or our Senate, our government is not wising up, and we are continuing the same policies that have failed for the last 2 decades. So I want to go back and look at our interventions and ask the question, have they been successful? Who was right about our interventions being a failure? And, it would just point out that what we're doing isn't working and it has to change. Now, the first thing we could look at is the Iraq War. That's the easy one. Complete failure. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Al-Qaeda was not in Iraq. It was all based on a lie, and that killed hundreds of thousands of people. But what about Afghanistan? Because that is supposedly, where the Taliban and Al-Qaeda is at. This is where bin Laden planned the attacks on 9/11. Has this actually been a successful intervention, Afghanistan? Well, we can look at our recent withdrawal. It was a complete disaster. People falling off planes, leaving weapons behind. But we were warned back in 2010 by Ron Paul. He said almost 12 years ago, this is going to be a failure. It failed when the Soviets tried to occupy Afghanistan. And the longer we stay here, the worse it's going to be. Listen to this short clip.
Military victory in Afghanistan is elusive. Does anyone really know whom we are fighting and why? Why has the war not ended? 9 years and it continues to spread. Some claim it is to keep America safe, that our soldiers are fighting and dying for our freedom, defending our Constitution. Are we being lied to in order to keep us in this spreading war, just as we were lied to in the 1960s to keep us in Vietnam? We own the Iraq government as we do Afghanistan's. In Afghanistan, we are fighting the Taliban, those dangerous people with guns defending their homeland. Once they were called the Mujahideen, our old allies, along with Osama bin Laden, in the fight to oust the Soviets from Afghanistan in the 1980s. In that effort, our CIA funded radical jihad against those nasty foreign occupier, the Russians. What gratitude! Those same people now resent our benevolent occupation with a little violence thrown in. The resistance to our presence grows as our perseverance wanes. Our people are waking up, but our officials refuse to recognize the longer we stay, the greater is the support for those dedicated to the principle that Afghanistan is for Afghans who resent all foreign occupation. The harder we fight a war that is not a war, the weaker we get and the stronger becomes our enemy. When an enemy without weapons can resist an army of great strength, the most powerful of all history, one should ask, who has the moral high ground? Military failure in Afghanistan is to be our destiny.
Pretty smart, right? Ron Paul, 2010, he called it exactly right. And what about Osama bin Laden? Was he in Afghanistan? He was not. He was in Pakistan. And the official story is that the U.S. government clandestinely went into Pakistan, killed bin Laden, and escaped without the Pakistani government knowing. But according to Seymour Hersh, a very well-respected journalist, we worked with the Pakistani government. They 100% knew he was there. So we spend 20 years in Afghanistan when Osama bin Laden is in Pakistan, the guest of the Pakistani government. Is everything a lie from our U.S. government? It would appear so. So in 2011, we killed Osama bin Laden. And I remember that night because when it happened, my first reaction wasn't, yes, we killed Osama bin Laden. My first reaction was, I don't buy this. Something about this seems off. And then a few years later, we get this report from Seymour Hersh saying, yeah, the Pakistani government knew he was there. We were working with them. They agreed to look the other way. And while we went in with our SEALs to assassinate him. And that's what happened. It wasn't a secret mission that the Pakistanis didn't know about. An absolute lie. So Afghanistan, complete failure. We've left. The Taliban is still there with all of our weapons. And again, what did we get out of 20 years there? Nothing. So let's move on to Libya. We intervened there. Hillary Clinton, she bragged about the fact that we killed Gaddafi.
We came, we saw, he died.
So here she is cackling about the death of Gaddafi. What has happened since then? Libya is a failed state with actual slave markets. So what good did we do in Libya? You tell me, because apparently the place is a disaster 10 years later. And any apology from the U.S. government? Are we doing anything to right that wrong? Nope. We just keep moving on. What about Syria? We have to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. Has that worked out? Well, here's a clip from 2012 from Ron Paul asking about the situation in Syria. Listen to this clip.
Mr. Speaker, last week I introduced legislation, H.R. 5993, that would prohibit the President from providing military or paramilitary aid of any sort to any faction in the internal fighting in Syria. Unfortunately, it appears that the administration is already very much involved in supporting the overthrow of the Assad government. There's nary a whimper of criticism in Congress over our growing involvement in the civil war in Syria. The only noise we hear from Congress and repeated in the media is the complaint that we're not doing enough and that immediate direct U.S. military action must be taken. Tragically, our political leaders show both bad judgment and short memories when it comes to the downside of our foreign policy of mischief and intervention. Our compulsion to engage ourselves in every conflict around the world is dangerous to our national security. In dealing with Syria, the administration pretends to pursue diplomacy and provide humanitarian assistance to the people. In reality, the U.S. government facilitates weapons transfers to the rebels who are demanding immediate regime change. There's every reason to expect that the well-laid plans to once again coordinate a favorable regime change will end badly. Even the strongest supporters of our direct and immediate military involvement in Syria admit the rebel forces are made up of many groups, including Al-Qaeda, and no one is sure to whom the assistance should be given. All they claim is the need for the immediate removal of Assad. This policy is nothing new, and too often in our recent history, our assistance with dollars and weapons used to overthrow a government ends up with the weapons being used instead against us.
This guy calls it every time when it comes to foreign policy. He said, are we going to actually affect regime change? Nope. Are we going to get the weapons to the right people? Nope. Apparently, ISIS has American weapons. There were stories back in 2017, ISIS running around with U.S. weapons. So we're giving weapons to the people we're claiming to be fighting the terrorist ISIS. But again, because the United States will use anybody in a proxy, if you're willing to fight Bashar al-Assad, maybe we can accidentally funnel some weapons to you to go fight Bashar al-Assad. But now it's 2023. The regime change completely failed. And we actually admitted that regime change is no longer an option for the United States, which is nice for us to admit after we failed in this 10-year war in Syria that has killed 500,000 people. Is Syria better off for the United States intervening? Not at all. An absolute mess and a failure, and Bashar al-Assad is still there as president of Syria. And so we have these interventions, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, that have all failed. And for people in Ukraine, this is something you should be paying attention to. The United States is using you as a proxy. Every once in a while, they slip up and say, we're having the Ukrainians fight Russia, so we don't have to.
The United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia here.
Does that sound like a friend saying, we want you to go die because we don't want to do it? And that's what we're doing. And we've admitted to it in our think tank papers, saying we want to destabilize Russia, hurt Russia by giving weapons to Ukraine so that they start fighting. This was our objective geopolitically. It was to weaken Russia by using Ukraine as a guinea pig to get slaughtered for us. And this, again, the question I ask, all of our interventions failed in all these other countries. Why do you think our intervention in Ukraine will be any better? What's going to happen? At some point, we're going to pull back, just like Afghanistan, just like Iraq, just like Syria, just like Vietnam. And we'll say, we did what we could. Sorry, time for us to go. And what's left in the wake? Hundreds of thousands of dead people. But they're not American. So our neocons in Washington, D.C., they don't care. It's not us. It's somebody else. That is the game the United States plays. We use the world as our guinea pigs, as our proxies, as people to be slaughtered for our geopolitical maneuvering. And as an American, as a non-interventionist, I want to see this stop. Because all this does is make the world hate our guts. And at this point, I can't blame them. Well, that's it for now. Again, if you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.